Good morning. I want to find out if you guys can recall. I remember when I was a little kid, there used to be a TV commercial that was on, and it was meant to encourage people to conserve water. Now, the way the commercial worked was you could see a little kid there brushing their teeth, and I think this might have been a Canadian commercial. It had that look to it. But there was a kid there brushing their teeth, and the tap water was on, running. And you'd see the tap water running, there's a little pipe that goes, and then there's a lake. And as the water's running out of the tap, the lake is going down more and more like this. And there's a little fish there, and the fish is like kind of doing this because the water level is coming lower and lower. And the commercial was meant, does anyone remember this, by the way? Have I really? Okay. Yeah, it could be. Anyway, I remember the commercial, and the point they were trying to get across was a good one, right? They were trying to say you need to conserve water, and one of the good ways to do that is if you're doing something, turn the tap off when you need it, turn it off when you don't need it. And by the way, to this day, I will turn the tap off when I'm brushing my teeth until I need it again. And if you're at my house visiting and you don't, I'm going to come by and turn it off for you. Because I cannot bear the water to be running. It's so ingrained in me that you must turn it off when you're not using it. And so the commercial, as a little kid, made an impression on me. Because I believed that I could make a difference. I could use less water and it would actually translate into some worthwhile thing in the real world. All right, now, as an adult, maybe you'd go, Kevin, I don't know if you realize that's not having a whole lot of impact, okay? And perhaps you would be right. Now, mind you, I still don't think waste is a good thing. And so if anyone does leave the tap on, I expect you to come forward and repent at the end of this lesson. But here's the point, right? As we grow older, we get a little bit jaded about these kind of things, don't we? And we no longer think that we can make a difference, and we no longer think it matters all that much, because we kind of go, look, no one else is doing it anyway. It's, I can turn my tap off, but there's a factory down the street that's pumping in hundreds of gallons, and, it's a waste of time for me to even make any effort to do anything different. And not only can we think that about average everyday things like how much water we use, but as God's people, it's easy to think that way. But I'm just one person. Or as we prepare for our congregational meeting, we're just one small church. Right? What possible difference can we make? And if you let that kind of thinking go too far, there's a real danger that you go, yeah, I don't think we should even do anything. Because, right, it's just a drop in the bucket. Not even a drop, okay? And I would like to maybe challenge that notion a little bit this morning by sharing a couple of points. I only have 2 points. I missed that day when you said you're supposed to have 3 points in a poem. We're going to break the rules a little bit, but 2 points. And the first thing is, doing the right thing is not just about the consequences. Okay? In fact, you could almost ask, who cares what difference it makes? Right? If it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. Isaiah is told, imagine being told this, by the way. In Isaiah chapter 6, we have the call of Isaiah. And Isaiah is told by God, I need someone to go to preach to my people and tell them what's wrong with the way that they're doing things, the way that they're living, and tell them to repent and change. And Isaiah volunteers. He says, I'll go and do that. And he says, by the way, I'm obviously paraphrasing here. He goes, by the way, God, how long, right? How long am I going to preach to them before they get the message and they repent and turn around and get things straight? And God says this. God says, until the cities lie in waste without inhabitant, and the houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. That's how long. In other words, they're not going to repent. They're not going to change, but you're going to go and preach to them anyway. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Even though they're not going to listen, it's still the right thing to do. And so, Isaiah, you go and preach. Now, as a preacher, that's not a super positive message, although I suspect it's one that all of us can in some ways identify with. Right? You may recall, it's not a long time, so hopefully you can remember. Last week, I talked about some things that are going on in our culture that are harmful, that are immoral. Right? And you could suggest, Kevin, after your sermon, I noticed, the school board didn't change its policy, and the TV and media didn't start, changing their message to be more in line with the will of God. What was the point, right? What difference is it going to make telling the truth about something in a culture such as ours? You may even ask it in your own home, right? What difference is it going to make if I teach just my one kid to know better? All the other kids are going to be doing whatever they're going to do anyway. Right? And the difference is the right thing is still the right thing, even if nobody wants to do it. We still need to do right, even if we can't find real good, measurable consequences. And sometimes that will be true. Did you ever help someone, and at the end of really putting yourself out and doing what you thought was above and beyond, they didn't show any gratitude, they just kind of carried on about their day? Has that ever happened to anyone? And so do you say to yourself, man, I guess I won't help anyone ever again? Right? I hope not. I really hope not. Right? Because it's right to do whether or not they respond the way you would like them to. Let me give you an example that I deal with on a pretty ongoing basis. A few times a week, sometimes less, sometimes more, the pager will go off, and it will be for a VSA. Pager will come on and they'll say, please respond to such and such an address for a 75-year-old male VSA. That means vital signs absent. No pulse, no breathing, okay? So we respond, and how often do you think we respond and administer first aid and this person turns out to be okay? Pretty well never, right? Maybe 2 times a year. And so you ask yourself, so when the pager goes off, should we all say, forget this guy, he's probably dead anyway, like why are we bothering? Right? When we get to the hall, we'll say, don't turn on the lights and sirens, just take your time and go over there. Would that be the right approach? No. Right? Imagine, by the way, if it was your family member who you called us for, and then, right? No, you want every single time to be taken as a life and death situation, because it could be. Right? And that one time makes all of the other times worth it. Have you ever shared the gospel with someone Who didn't respond? Who didn't care? Why? Because it's the right thing to do. At the very least, you gave that individual an opportunity to respond, which is actually pretty huge. Okay? And still worth doing over and over again, even though the fact is many people may not respond. Okay, so that's the first point. And granted, it may be a little negative, but I want to make it very, very clear that we do the right thing because it's the right thing. Right? Even if we never get the consequences we wanted to get. Right? Even if no one agrees with us and no one responds, we still do right because it's right. Okay? That's the first point. But the second point is this. Often you don't know how much you're doing. You don't know how big of an impact what you're doing may have. I know we could all tell stories, and certainly I know some, of people who are Christians because of the influence who died, of someone who died long before they ever made that choice. Right? So that person who did their best and did the right thing all through their life and never saw the results, 20 years after they died, someone who they had an impact on is still around, and that impact is still ongoing. Right? We don't know what difference it may make. Right? When you go to the store, if you're traveling around, Meaford, you talk to the cashier, do you say thank you? Me too. And maybe you think it's such a small thing, it doesn't really matter. But then one day, you see your child go and talk to the worker at the store, and they say thank you. Right? And you realize that small thing makes far more difference than you ever anticipated that it could. You invite someone to church, right? And they always say no. You think it's still polite, right? And I'm going anyway, and I maybe see them on my way or whatever. And so I just say, hey, if you're free, come on by. And maybe it never makes a difference, right? But I also know all kinds of people who've told me about their friend who asked them to come to church not once, not twice, not 20 times, but for years. And one time, for some reason, they decided to say okay. Right? Just that small thing. That over time makes a difference. I could actually take that one step further. I have a friend who was working as a mechanic and decided to become a preacher. And when he made that choice, his dad, who already wasn't a fan of the fact that he was a Christian in the first place, was so mad at him that he didn't talk to him for like a year and a half. It was like, what are you thinking? Who would regularly give him a hard time just for having faith at all. All right, so we're beyond just the person who doesn't want to come to church when you ask them. This friend of mine, his dad would take opportunities to put him down for believing what he believed. And in a situation like that, you could think, man, just stay away from that bozo, right? But Brian didn't do that. And over about 10 years' time, he just kept bringing it up. He just kept reminding his dad. And today, his dad's a Christian. Because of just slow, persistent steps. We're going to have a meeting in a little while. And at the meeting, we're going to discuss things that we could do or not do. We're going to talk about what limitations we have, what resources we have, and how we could use those resources. And it's easy to think to yourself, why would we do that? I mean, what difference is it going to make anyway? But the fact is, first of all, doing the right thing is the right thing, even if it doesn't make a difference. But very often it does. And it doesn't have to be some huge, earth-shattering thing. You may notice if you're here, and sometimes you're not here, but if you're not, I'll let you know that the Sunday school class every morning collects food for the food bank. Right? And as they walk down the aisle here, a number of people put food in. Now, I promised them, I guess 2 weeks ago, maybe 1 week ago now, that we would talk to the chairman who is going to be, up here organizing our worship on Sunday and say, chairman, let's remind the whole congregation that the food basket is back there, that they walk by it every day or every Sunday. And even though the kids might not be carrying it down the hall, you can still bring in your item and drop it in. Pretty small thing. Right? If it's a bag of spaghetti, what's that, like $1.49 from Walmart? But to someone who's hungry, that $1.49 is a pretty big deal. And, compared to larger groups, perhaps we can't make as big an impact as, the church that has 5,000 people or 500 people. But, our community notices that. I don't know if you take any of the Meaford papers, but you'll sometimes, now Gordon and June don't do it as much, but when they were always going to the food bank, they were on the cover of that paper more than once. Because the Meaford Church of Christ continued to bring the amount of food that we brought to the food bank. Right? And for you, it's one small can. God, it turns out, is able to do some pretty significant things with only a limited person, with only limited resources and limited abilities. There's a song that says, he makes beautiful things out of dust. Imagine what he can do with us. And of course, we can extrapolate that further to say, he created the whole universe from nothing. And so as we contemplate the decisions we're going to make as individuals, and in a little while here as a congregation, I want to remind you of a simple Sunday school story that all of us know very well. If you look in the Gospel of John, right at the beginning of chapter 6, verses 1 through 13, you'll find that Jesus and the apostles have gone out to a place in the wilderness, and large crowds have come to hear Jesus. And it's astutely pointed out that these people have nothing to eat. In fact, Philip feels the need to point out, for 200 denarii, which at the time was a lot of money, we could only give each person a little to eat, not enough to satisfy them even. But Andrew, who interestingly enough in the Gospels has a habit of bringing people to Jesus, Andrew comes and he says, we found this boy. And he has 5 loaves and 2 fishes. But he says this, what are 5 loaves and 2 fishes among so many? Right? We can't do anything with this, in other words. But Jesus offers a word of prayer and has them start to distribute the fish and the loaves. And what happens? I bet you even the little kids here could tell us what happens, right? There's enough to feed everyone and more. And so, I think it's time for us, each individually, but us also as the Meaford Church of Christ, to come to God and say, here are 5 loaves and 2 fishes. To give him what we have and let him do what he can do. Understanding by faith that it's far more than what we're able to do. And I would like to extend that just a little. I know we're getting ready to have a meeting and it's important to think about faith at that time, but what if every morning when you got up, you thought to yourself, what I have today, I'm going to give to the Lord. What I have today in terms of time and resources and attention and effort, right? Here it is. Do what you can do with it because it's much more than I can do with it. And so we can make those small changes, those small steps. And to us, they may seem small, and they may even start small. But very often we have no idea what God is able to do with just small things. So if you're here today, and you need to make changes, if you're struggling with something, we want you to know as your church family that we're here for you. That we love you and we want what's best for you. And we're willing to help you make those changes. You can come forward or you can come and see me after church. If you're here and you've never become a Christian, Jesus was able to do an awful lot with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he can do an awful lot with your life, the first of which is forgiveness of sin. And so if that's your need, to repent and be baptized for forgiveness of sins, you can come as we stand and as we sing.